Greetings all, this is Hairy Nick, and we're back again to talk about some more X-Wing 2nd Edition spoilers. Today we have an article from FFG about the Nantex-Class Starfighter for the Separatist Alliance, coming out in Wave 6? Are we up to 6? No, 6 is the next one. This is Wave 5. Trying to keep track of all this. Basically, this is this ship here with a very pointy face and a weird weapon, kind of really cool dial, and a very flavoursome, high variance sort of glass cannon ace-like abilities. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's get through it. First of all, the stats of the ship. This is our baseline pilot here, the Stargason Hive Guard. That's a bit of a mouthful. At Initiative 3, for our lowest initiative pilot, we have an attack of 3 red dice in the bullseye firing arc, or a 2-turreted attack. 3 green dice and 4 hull. And it's interesting because our actions are only focus and evade. You don't actually have the action to rotate the turret apart from in the baked-in ability, which reads, you cannot rotate your turret to your rear arc. Makes sense. If you take a look at the image of the ship with the gimbal, the cockpit physically stops the turret from firing backwards, so that's why it's like that. It's almost like a forward-facing primary weapon, but there's a bit more flexibility on it. After you execute a maneuver, you may gain 1 tractor token to perform a rotate turret action. So, look, before we get into anything else, I think it's important that we break this part of the ship down, have a chat about it, and just clarify something which I think, if left unchecked, could cause a bit of confusion in tournaments, especially for newer players, because that last sentence we have here, you may gain 1 tractor token to perform a rotate turret action. Now, this is a pretty typical cost and effect, the kind of thing we have on rules text on lots of cards in lots of different kinds of games. And in X-Wing, we already have a clear precedent on how these kinds of things work. In some games, you can pay the cost and ignore the effect if for some reason the cost is beneficial. And the reason I bring that up in this case is because the cost here is actually of a benefit. You can gain a tractor token on your own ship, and by doing so, you are allowed to execute a boost or a barrel roll, so long as the boost is just the one straight. You can't do curved boosts like you could with the regular action. So you're actually in a situation where the cost is, in certain situations, an upside. In fact, in most situations, an upside. You use that to basically boost and barrel roll with this ship without being able to boost and barrel roll in order to rotate the turret. So it's upside to do upside, in other words. And it's very important. We do have a stipulation in the rules document already that you cannot choose to not execute the effect. In other words, you cannot just take a tractor token and then not rotate your turret. It's also important to note that when you do the rotate turret action, it must move to a different arc. You cannot execute the action and keep it within the same arc. And I think that is very important because I know a lot of people may think that, oh, I can just rotate it to the same arc just so I can get the effect of taking the tractor token. No, you can't do that. You must do both. Barring some ruling from FFG, this is how it's going to be. You must do both. And I think that plays into the riskiness of this ship. As I said, it feels a lot like a glass cannon. Yeah, you have access to a lot of what would seem like very degenerate things with a lot of really hyper efficient repositioning abilities, but you got to remember it comes at a cost. Taking a tractor token is dangerous. It means you're rolling 1 less green dice during the attack phase, so be aware of that. It's not as all upside as some people on social media seem to be indicating. But with all of that in mind, yes, it is significant upside because if we take a look at the dial, we can see this thing can seriously move. This is the kind of dial you'd usually see on a TIE variant of some kind, although most TIE variants don't have access to blue maneuvers on 1, 2, and 3 speed. Indeed, it has access to 3 different maneuvers on both 2 and 3 that are blue maneuvers, which is fantastic. Now, it doesn't have any hard turns that are blue. I don't think that's really a huge cost, especially when you have hyper-efficient boosting and barrel rolls, although the boosts can't curve, so maybe that is going to be tough on the way it turns. But just one more thing to do with the rules of this ship before we look at some of these spoilers. In the rules, it does stipulate that to do a cost and effect ability on any card or pilot or ship or whatever, you must be able to execute that effect in order to pay that cost. In other words, if you can't take a rotate arc action for whatever reason, it means you can't take that tractor token. That means you cannot do a red maneuver, despite the fact that you can fully execute that red maneuver. If you are doing a red maneuver, because you're unable to take that rotate arc action, it also means you can't do that tractoring. That's a very important thing to remember. Also remember, if you fully execute a maneuver over an obstacle, flying over an obstacle, unless it's debris cloud that gives you stress, causes you to skip your perform action step, but it doesn't mean that you can't take bonus actions. So if you do a maneuver and you're not stressed and you land on an asteroid, you can take a tractor token and then rotate that arc. In fact, you can take the tractor token and move yourself specifically onto a rock and rotate the arc. I don't know why you'd want to, but it's something you can do. These little interactions are pretty weird, but this is a pretty weird ship, and I think it's important that we get all of this sorted out before we actually get to playing with them on the table. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's actually have a look at some of these new pilots. Starting off with the generics. Now, apart from that Initiative 3, we also have the Petranaki Arena Ace. Petranaki. That's a mouthful at Initiative 4. Now, I think it's pretty safe to assume that this pilot will have a talent and the Initiative 3 won't, although it's not out of the question to imagine that they will both have talents, because as we'll see in a second, this ship actually has some unique talents just specifically for this ship, which is very uncommon in this game. Moving along, at Initiative 2 we have Gorgle. During the system phase, you may gain 1 disarm token and choose a friendly ship at range 1 to 2. Which you must remember cannot be this ship because it is at range 0 of itself, not range 1. If you do, it gains 1 tractor token. Then repair one of its face-up ship trait damage cards. Now that's interesting. Also note that this doesn't have the pay this cost to do this effect clause on this card. It says then repair one of its face-up ship trait damage cards. That's a bit more ambiguous. It is possible, and we may need a ruling on this, that you are able to do this without that ship having any face-up ship trait damage cards. I think that is the case. I think you don't require that in order to give them the tractor token. Just be aware we might need a ruling on that at some point. But giving a friendly ship a tractor token, again, gives you the ability to boost or barrel roll them. Again, the boost must just be straight. Which is really, really good. Handy alongside vultures and hyenas, I suppose. This isn't just for other Nantex. It's a good support role ability for Initiative 2. That's generally what we want to see at the lower initiatives. And that just seems kind of decent. It does feel like something that is going to be more handy alongside other Nantex because they seem to lean in more to the kind of ace role. I can't imagine this being very valuable alongside a swarm of vultures, for example, because you've just got so many. And I just can't imagine that repositioning just one of those is going to make much of a difference, so that is worth keeping in mind. However, alongside vultures and hyenas, getting rid of that damage card could be more helpful as well, especially with hyenas. They can be pretty high priority targets, so yes, I like this. Also, it plays quite nicely with this new talent that's been revealed. Gravitic Deflection. While you defend, you may reroll 1 defense die for each tractored ship in the attack arc, which can be any ship. It can be an enemy ship, it can be a friendly ship. By design, this plays around more with friendly ships easily because you simply have more agency to do that. So if you have a pilot like Gorgle, that's going to help you a lot because not only do you have the ability to put tractor tokens on Gorgle, but you can put tractor tokens on friendly ships. And if Gorgle's rolling 2 defense dice, which they should do if they've got a tractor token, that means you could re-roll both of them. I mean, you might go blank blank into blank blank, but again, you felt good doing it, so that's the main thing. Interesting interaction with that talent. I mean, at the end of the day, you're making your low initiative support ship a bit more combat effective, so maybe that's not a huge priority. Maybe if Gravitic Deflection is just a bit too expensive, you won't do this, but it is an option, and it seems to play a bit more powerfully on this pilot as opposed to the aces. We actually have another talent which we'll talk about in a second for those aces. Alright, moving up the initiative of named pilots, we have Shurtik at Initiative 4. While you perform an attack, if the defender is tracted, you may reroll up to 2 attack die. Okay, and this plays heavily into the other talent that we had revealed that is Nantex only in Ensnare. At the end of the activation phase, if you're attracted, you may choose one ship in your mobile firing arc at range 0 to 1, transfer one attracted token to it. Now, that's not the easiest thing with this pilot. It's going to be range 0 to 1. You're flying at initiative 4, so catching your opponent's ship with that mobile firing arc might not be super easy. However, you do have a lot of flexibility over the way it moves with that baked-in ability, so this is not out of the question for initiative 4. And of course, if your opponent's flying like a beef or swarm list with lots of low initiative pilots, you're laughing. This is going to work really, really well. Shotik has the ability to really capitalize off some good planning, good positioning. If that's in the bullseye firing arc at range 1, it means you're firing with 4 dice, rerolling 2. There's a reason the subtitle for this pilot is Opportunistic Ace. It's all about super high upside for some good planning and positioning, similar to the kind of effect we have on General Grievous. Next up, we have Burwer Kret. It takes all of my mental power not to say Brewer Kret. It's Burwer Kret. Initiative 5. After you perform an attack that hits, each friendly ship with a calculate on its action bar and a lock on the defender may perform a red calculate action. Okay, so this is for flying alongside Vultures, Hyenas, or 066 in the Sith Infiltrator. This is kind of handy alongside Vultures with energy shell charges for sure. It means you can get those double modded attacks. And it has a lot of upside when you're flying lots of platforms alongside this pilot. It's not for flying alongside other Nantex, but that's okay. It's like a high initiative support thing that you do alongside Vultures. I don't know how to sort of categorize that. It's not really doing the same thing that like a Hyena or a Belbelub's doing alongside the Vultures. It's about more and more aggression. And I quite like this. I think this is the kind of thing that could do really, really well. Now, obviously, we can't put something like Kraken on this platform. It doesn't have that upgrade slot. That's okay. It's not about doing that kind of thing. So maybe you want to fly this and something like General Grievous or 066 alongside some Vultures. It'll be interesting to see how that balances out. Or that replaces that kind of effect entirely and you just focus on Burwer Kret. It's really hard to say fast. But I like it. I like it a lot. I don't know if it's better than something like Kraken, being able to retain your calculate tokens. I feel like maybe stacking on these effects is maybe just a bit too much and we're just going to want one or the other. But I like it. And it's Initiative 5. That's very, very relevant indeed. But probably not as relevant as this next pilot we're going to take a look at, which has got a lot of forums abuzz right now. This is the Initiative 6 Sun Fac, which you must say very slowly and carefully. While you perform an attack, if the defender is tracted, roll 1 additional attack die. So this has got Ensnared basically stapled onto it. Initiative 6, that baked-in ability, and Ensnared, this has got some serious upside. There is no ace in the game that can arc dodge quite as effectively as this. I will say it doesn't double reposition, but it does reposition your ship, and then if you enact the text on Ensnared, you reposition your opponent's ship, which is in situations better or worse than just double repositioning your own ship. Because apart from anything else, moving your opponent's ship means you can affect the amount of shots they take. Maybe they have no shots after you track to their ship. But yeah, this is all about rocking this with Ensnared. Like say your opponent's ship's flying this way, you're flying this way, you boost forward, then boost them, and then suddenly you're shooting them in the back. When you actually had relative distance from your opponent to start that whole situation with, it seems really, really good, and I do not think that this pilot is going to come cheap. FFG have really made a point of costing Initiative 6 pilots with relevant abilities quite steeply, especially on platforms with good dials, good ace-like abilities, repositioning, all that kind of stuff that gets better and better and better when you go up in initiative. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Sunfac actually just straight up cost more than Assunta fell. Given that Sun's got 4 hull, the action bar isn't as good, but pinpoint tractor array lets you reposition, but it's only a single reposition, but it's boosting or barrel rolling, but it's doing it in a more risky way because you're losing green dice when you do it. There's a lot more risk involved. Sunterfell has one less hull. It's hard to quantify. I think ultimately because Sunfac has the extra hull, that's just going to push them a little bit further than Suntia. They don't have the consistent 3 red dice attack, but it is a gimbaled shot that you can shoot sideways if you need to. There's a lot of variables going on here, and trying to cost this in my mind is quite difficult. It's not going to be cheap. I think it's going to be a bit more than Suntia. That's the call I'm making right now. Probably not quite so much as a ship like Fen Rao, who has boosts and barrel rolls linked into focuses. I think that is in general a bit more powerful. It also doesn't have the downside of using trap tokens. I know Fen Rao can't take a card like Ensnared or would be able to make any use out of it. And I think that means that the ceiling on Sunfac is higher. I think tractoring yourself and then untractoring yourself to tractor your opponent's ship and having the risk of not catching your opponent's ship if you don't quite execute or plan correctly. There's risk. There's risk involved with this, and I think that's going to stop it from being crazy, stupid expensive. I think some people on a few forums are overreacting, thinking this is going to be just totally degenerate on Separatist faction. I don't think this is going to break anything. I don't think FFG are going to undercost this. I think they've got a good handle on the way they're costing their Initiative 6 pilots right now. Just fingers crossed, there's nothing wrong there, but I think we're probably going to be fine with this. And the last thing I'll say about this pilot, I do want to mention the fact that this is a relatively non-canon or a lesser class of canon because Sunfac appeared in the video games Republic Commandos at Initiative 6 on the Separatist faction, something we don't really see a lot of. Generally, Initiative 6 pilots tend to be canon pilots. The Empire and First Order kind of get away with it a bit more because they have better flight academies and that kind of stuff, so they can have pilots like quick draw and all that kind of stuff at Initiative 6, even though they're not like on-screen canon. So it's kind of weird that so early in the life of the Separatist faction, we have an Initiative 6 pilot that really isn't iconic in any kind of way. I feel like Sunfac, in terms of the class of pilot, kind of falls into the same category as Talonbane Cobra, who was pushed down to Initiative 5. So, yeah, it's kind of weird, but obviously Initiative 6 plays around with the design of this pilot. If they were Initiative 5, I don't know if it would be as desirable, so I do understand this choice from a design point of view. I just think in terms of the flavour of X-Wing, it is odd that this pilot on the Separatist faction is Initiative 6. That's all I'll say about this for now. Also confirmed in this article, we are getting a copy of Targeting Computer, which we can now confirm just completely has its first edition design put straight into second edition with no changes whatsoever. It's interesting. Some people seem to be concerned about this because I've heard people comment it's kind of against the ethos of second edition, FFG just giving us upgrades that can just plonk things onto action bars like Targeting Computer. And I would say I don't think this is a problem. It was never really a problem in first edition, and there were way more things that could combo with this in first edition. I'm getting lots of comments from people saying, oh, this is going to be really great on Sunterfell, for example. I don't really know if Sunterfell wants this kind of effect. It's not something he heavily favoured in first edition, and considering he tends towards more lighter builds in second edition, I can't see this being that effectual unless it's relatively cheap. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if this was more than it was in first edition at the 2, or I guess relatively speaking 4 points now. I'm imagining 5 or 6 points, and it'll see fringe play on some ships, but I don't think it's going to be anything crazy. Also revealed here is Snapshot, which we now have a nice high-res image of, which is quite nice. So this is entirely Snapshot from first edition, except it works in range 2 instead of range 1. It has this little missile icon, which means there's no range bonuses. Not that it matters, because it's range 2 anyway. It basically is a one-off attack. If your opponent's ship flies into range 2, you get to just roll 2 red dice and they suffer whatever you roll. You can't convert, focus, or re-roll. You can use certain things like Trick Shot to edit the amount of dice you're rolling, which is quite interesting, but you still can't modify your dice after that, so that's okay, I think. Be interesting to see how this is costed in second edition. It was 2 points in first edition. I think this kind of effect is probably more sought after now. I think just in terms of what we're seeing in second edition, we're more interested in more attacks over quality of attacks. We don't have as many dice reassurances in second edition. And that probably means that this can be costed a bit higher. Again, it was 2 points relative to 4 points now. I would expect at least 6 points on this, but we'll see. If there's any kind of scale in the way this is costed, that could be interesting because this could actually be costed inversely against initiative. This does have a lot of value on low initiative pilots because they specifically fly before your opponent's high initiative pilots, especially if you're using certain kind of effects to look at your opponent's dial, like sense or something like that. It means that you are able to reposition your low initiative ships and catch your opponent's high initiative ships and use Snapshot against them, which is actually quite handy against aces because it means your opponent won't have a chance to focus or evade before they get attacked. One very interesting interaction here though, it does say after an enemy ship executes a maneuver. So if this is used against enemy Nantex or like Jedi Starfighters, anything that can use a repositioning ability after it executes a maneuver, you then have to use the first player token to decide who gets to use their effect first, which means there's actually an upside on like Jedi Starfighters taking the first player token so they can reposition before your opponent has to use Snapshot against you. That's a bit of an odd interaction and a legitimate reason, a legitimate upside rather, for ace platforms to take the first player token, something we don't usually see, so that's kind of a fun little interaction. In any case, that is all the information we currently have for the Nantex. This is the first article of the new ships that are coming out in Wave 5. Hopefully we get a Y-Wing article next week. FFG are really inconsistent with the way they bring out these articles. They sometimes look like they're going to do them weekly. Sometimes it's like a month between articles. I mean, who knows at this stage? For us content creators, I really wish these were a bit more consistent, but who knows? Maybe they are going to be more consistent from this point on. Anyway, in the meantime, do not forget to like and subscribe so you can keep up with all this new information on X-Wing. I will cover it as it comes out. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter and Reddit. Please consider supporting my Patreon. Above all else, it's the best thing you can do right now to help support this channel monetarily. Thank you so much to all of my existing patrons. You guys are absolutely friggin' awesome, and I'll catch you all in the next video.